Hey y'all, Fred here. Thanks so much for joining me today. We are going to do some cut testing with the Civivi Vision FG. I did a full review on this. If you want to see the full review, you're welcome to go back and watch that. You'll find it here on the channel. But really what I want to do with this knife here today is not so much concerned with the knife itself. The Vision FG is a great knife, but as you know, this knife uses the Nitro V steel, and I want to create a baseline for that. If you haven't had a chance to watch my video where I did a comparison of all the different types of steels, it's certainly a very interesting watch and enlightening in terms of how some of the lower cost steels compare to some of the higher cost steels. So wanted to do a little cut testing. This is going to serve just as a baseline comparison. This is obviously a great knife that is well respected. And so I want to do a little cut testing. This is the first time I'm doing this video or this type of video where we're doing cut testing, so you'll see my setup isn't exactly perfect yet. I'm still working out the bugs. Certainly open to ideas or suggestions you guys have on how we can make these cut tests look a little better and flow a little more smoothly. But I needed to get some baseline data, and we're going to go through cutting several different types of materials here and just see how the edge holds up on this VG10. I did not sharpen this knife beforehand, so you know, it is what it is. You'll see here when we get started, I'll cut paper at the beginning, and then after each little piece of the test, we'll go back and cut paper again and see how the edge holds up through each of these different cuttings. I do want to give credit where credit is due also. 𝗧𝗲𝘀𝘁 has a great YouTube channel here where he does all kinds of cut testing on different knives, but unfortunately he's not going to be reviewing any kind of replica knives like we do here, and that's ultimately our goal, is to find a baseline from these real knives that we can then compare to some of the replica knives and see just how bad or not how bad the steel is on these knives. All right, so with that being said, let's dive in here and get started on our cut tests. You know, I think the baseline for everything we're going to do is cutting paper. Just that's a simple way to see how the blade is holding an edge. So I'm always going to start with cutting a few pieces of paper, and we'll see how the edge cuts, and then we'll move on to each of these cutting tests. You can see in the first test here, obviously we're going to start with cardboard. That's one of the softer materials that we'll cut during this test. I'm still, again, trying to figure out the best ways and angles. You can see I've got some tape, obviously, at the top of this box that I got from Walmart. Pretty good cardboard, and you can see the knife is cutting nicely through it. You know, VG10 is a great steel, so we expect it to hold an edge much better than maybe a cheap Chinese steel might do. We'll see how well this edge holds up, but at least for the beginning of our test here, it seems to be slicing very nicely, just cutting right through this cardboard, tape and all. So let's see how this edge holds up. We're almost finished with the cardboard here. I was pretty happy with it. It's a matter of getting the angles right. There is certainly technique involved in this here, holding it right. You can see I do have some cut resistant gloves on. I'm trying to be a little bit safe in how I'm handling this. Obviously I've cut quite a bit of cardboard in my lifetime with these knives. I've done a lot of this testing on my own. I've just never recorded it. So now that we're done with the cardboard, we're going to go back to the paper and see how has that affected the edge. And you can see here, I'm going to cut a lot of paper because I'm kind of having a hard time believing this edge could be dull from just that much cardboard. But what I've also discovered, and you can see me playing with it on the knife, is the tape had a lot of residue on it. So I feel like that was also hurting the knife's ability to cut through paper. I keep looking at it thinking, wow, this is shocking me. Certainly, I didn't dull the edge of this VG10 just from that little amount of cardboard. But you can see it definitely put a dent in the edge of this knife, and I'm trying to show you here that there's a lot of tape residue on this blade right now. So I don't know if that's what's holding it back. Certainly there would be some tape residue on the edge as well. So I've decided here that what I really need to do is go get some blade cleaner and clean off all the gunk on the blade. I use this KPL knife shield, and if you guys haven't seen this before, this is a really good solution for tape residue. It's also really good for protecting knives like a D2 or more of your corrosion-prone types of steels, but it's excellent at removing that tape residue from your knife blade. So it cleans almost as well, maybe even better, than it protects. So I tend to pull that out when I have a bunch of gunk on my knife blade. I don't think it's fair to really give this thing to keep trying to test the sharpness if what I know I can see there's so much tape residue on that blade. I know I need to get that off if I'm going to be able to continue this test. So I'm going to have to think about that going forward, in that I can't have a ton of tape residue on there. It's not really fair to the blade and to the cutting test itself when you have that much residue on there. So I'm going to clean this thing off, and we're going to get back in business and back to the tests again. All right, so now that we have cleaned the blade off a little bit, I'm going to come back and try this paper cutting again just to see how much was just the gunk on the blade versus how dull we got it from those first tests. You can see it definitely has improved a little bit, but clearly there's still some damage to that blade just from cutting the cardboard. That was a bit of a surprise to me in this test. So let's move on to the next test. Anyhow, this is a rubber disposal hose. It's got kind of nylon threads woven through the middle of it. Pretty large and heavy-duty rubber. So just want to see how much this will dull the blade. Just another decent, potentially real-world cutting test. A lot of people out there may decide to use a knife for cutting things like this, and so I want to see how much this might dull the blade. We're just going to cut basically 3 rings. You can see it's already having a bit of a tough time working its way through this. Again, some of this is technique, and I will improve with my cutting technique of this as these tests continue. But you can see it takes a little bit of effort to get that cut off. Once it's cut off, it's easy to dice it up into tiny chunks. But thought I'd give it a test anyhow. Chop up the rings, get a little bit of extra cutting on at least on the tip, but some on the belly as well. Just really trying out a lot of different ways of cutting different materials, and we're going to see how that will impact the blade. So now I think I'm going to get the piece of paper back out, and let's see, did the rubber hose do any more damage to the knife? And you can see it's definitely struggling at this point in time. Looks like there's a little bit of edge left towards the tip, but back towards the heel of the blade, you can see it does not want to start these cuts at all. Again, kind of shocking. I really expected this VG10 to last and hold the edge better than it did. But if you go back and look at the charts, one of the things you'll notice is that VG10 doesn't particularly have the best edge retention. It's only slightly better than some of the others. So let's move on. This is now 3-inch Sisal rope. I don't know if it's Sisal or Sisal. Y'all can tell me in the comments what the correct pronunciation is. I'm going to be interested to see how you even spell out the correct pronunciation. I will look that up for next time so I don't sound so uneducated. I'm going to try to do 10 cuts. Again, this is part technique and part blade. You can see it is just really not wanting to cut this rope. Of course, this is, very tough rope. It's very fibrous, always going to be a bit of an edge killer. That's why I like to do it last in the cutting test, is because I know if I haven't killed my edge yet, by the time I start sawing on this Sisal rope, it's going to be dead towards the end of that. I didn't do a good job of keeping up with counting my cuts here. I wanted to do 10. I'm trying to maintain a little bit of a standard, and I think I may have only gotten through 9 there, but you can see this knife is clearly dull at this point. So we'll do a little testing on the paper here just to see how much more we have dulled it, but you can see from cutting my hand or not cutting my hand, this blade has definitely taken the fine edge off of the edge of the blade here, which is fine. It's the whole purpose of this test is to really establish a baseline of how many cuts and what types of materials does it take for known good quality knives like the VG10 on the Civivi is definitely known to be a really good, decent budget steel. It's among the higher end. So now we're getting a bit of a baseline. You can see we have clearly dulled the edge of this knife. So that's going to give us really a nice baseline from which we'll run the same exact tests on some of these other knives that we're purchasing, some of the replica knives that we have, and this will help kind of give us that comparison. So we have apples to apples. I know that the Civivi Vision FG only made it through so many square inches of cardboard. I did measure that before we cut it up, so I know what the square inches of the cardboard are, etc. Now I'm going to go into one last test here where I really want to strop it up. It's something I decided kind of at the end to add into this test here, is that, okay, we know we've got a dull blade here after we finished our testing. How easy is it going to be to get this thing stropped back to a decent level of sharpness, just using the strop alone, not even putting it on a real sharpener? So I'll speed the video up here so it goes a little bit faster. What I tend to do is 3 strokes on either side to begin, then I alternate back and forth for about 10 to 15 strokes per side. And what I find is for almost all of the knives, the steels that we work with, unless you're working with some kind of super steel, that's usually enough to bring it back to a pretty good edge. And you're going to see here in just a second that just that strop, that little bit of stropping, has definitely brought it back considerably. Now, is this as sharp as it was to begin with? Probably not. It could certainly do with maybe a trip through the old Work Pro sharpener, but I'll tell you, for what it's worth, just being able to strop it back in that amount of time and get back to that kind of a keen edge, that suits me just fine and means we have a pretty good steel that is easy to work with. So there you go. We're going to kind of wrap it up here. If you would, please hit that subscribe and like and notification and all that fun stuff down below. Let me know if you have any other suggestions for testing, and appreciate you here, and we will see you on the next video. Thanks. Have a great day.